Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Gimel, Daf 13 of Masechta Pesachim. The first part of the Daf really continues talking about the machlokas between Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda concerning when you have to stop eating chametz. We also throw the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel into the mix. And the second Amud discusses what Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah, that there were two breads that they would keep on Har Habayis, and they would use those breads to indicate if you're allowed to be eating chametz or not. Let's get started. On Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, on the second line, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Nachman says in the name of Rav that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you can eat chametz up until and including the 4th hour, but by the 5th hour you stop eating chametz, but you could still feed it to your animal. And then in the 6th hour, you burn it. Amalei Rav Rav Nachman. So then Rav says to his Rebbe Rav Nachman, but why, Rav Nachman, why are you saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? Wouldn't it make more sense to say that the halacha is like Reb Meir, Desasim Lantana Kavase, because we have a Tana, we have a Mishnah, we have a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir, meaning interestingly, we have a principle that is always attributed to Rabbi Yochanan, that halacha is Stam Mishnah, that if you have a Mishnah, an unattributed Mishnah that says a halacha, so then that is the halacha. And therefore, so we're not attributing that right now to Rabbi Yochanan, but the Gemara nonetheless seems to be asking, or Rava seems to be asking Rav Nachman, after all, the first Mishnah of the next parak on Daf Chaf Aleph seems to be an unattributed Mishnah that is exactly like the opinion of Reb Meir. Why? What does it say? The Tanan, as we learn in the first Mishnah of the next parak, Kol shah shemutar le'echol ma'achil, that as long as you're able to eat chametz, you can also feed it to your animals. Now, the implication being that if you're unable to eat the chametz, then you'd be unable to feed it to your animals. Now, the thing is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he actually says that you can only eat chametz through the 4th hour until the 5th hour. Now, once it hits the 5th hour, you can no longer eat chametz, but you can still feed it to your animals. And therefore, from the fact that we have a Mishnah that says that as long as you can eat it, you can feed it to your animals, implying that if you cannot eat it, then you cannot feed it to your animals. Well, that sounds like it would be not like Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara answers, Ayi lav stama hu? No, don't say that. That is actually not a Stam Mishnah that is supporting Reb Meir, because the kasha mutter. Because as we're going to see in the Gemara over there in Daf Chaf Aleph, that the Gemara actually asks, why does it say the word mutar there? It says kol shah shemutar le'echol ma'achil. As long as it is mutar to eat, you can also feed it to your animals. And the conclusion over there is that it means that as long as it's mutar for somebody else, as long as it's mutar for a Kohen to eat truma, that's going to be the maskana over there, that it's referring to a Kohen eating truma, that as long as the Kohen can eat truma, then you can still feed the chametz to your animals, which therefore sounds like it would be like the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel in our Mishnah, who says that during the 4th hour you can eat chulin, and then during the 5th hour Kohanim can eat truma, and during the 6th hour everyone says that you already have to burn it. Well then, okay, so Rav Nachman, then why don't you say that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel? Because after all, he's the compromise position. Now let's go weiter for a second. So Amar Rabbi Gamliel lav machriyahu tam denafshe ka'amar. Rabbi Nachman says that Rabbi Gamliel is not the compromise position. He's saying his own opinion, and meaning because really Rabbi Gamliel is apples and oranges with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Meaning, if Rabbi Yehuda, let's say, would say that during the 4th hour you're allowed to eat chulin and truma, but during the 5th hour you're not allowed to have neither chulin nor truma, and Reb Meir said that in the 5th hour you can eat both chulin and truma. And now comes Rabbi Gamliel and says that you can eat chulin in the 4th hour, right? Or really in the 5th hour you could not eat chulin, but you can eat truma. So then he would be the compromised position. The thing is, neither Rabbi Yehuda nor Rabbi Meir said anything about truma and chulin, and therefore Rabbi Gamliel isn't really coming to make any kind of compromise over here. He's just saying his own opinion, which has to do with truma and chulin, but he's not coming to be a compromised position between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Or if you want, okay, fine. So Rav Nachman said the name of Rav, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. We wanted to ask, well, shouldn't we say that, well, we have a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir? We said we don't have a Stam Mishnah like Meir. If anything, it's like Rabbi Gamliel. And then we wanted to say maybe it should be like Rabbi Gamliel because he's a Machriya, but we say he's not a Machriya. So in the end, Rav says that Rabbi Nachman says in the name of Rav that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. And interestingly, in Masechta Eruvin, on Daf Memvav Mud Beis, we had said over there that when you have machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, so the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So from that perspective, it would make sense to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Or if you want to say, Rav de Omar ki hai Tana, that Rav is saying like the following Tana, the Tanya is learned in a Brisa, Arba Asur Shechalios b'Shabbos, that if the 14th day of Nisan falls out on Shabbos, Mivarin, i.e. Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, so Mivarin is hakol milifnei Shabbos. So you burn everything, burn all the chametz before Shabbos. V'sorfen trumas tameis, and if you have truma that is impure, you burn that too. Tluyas, if you have truma that you're not sure if it's pure or impure, burn that also. V'tehoros, if you have truma that is pure, burn that as well. Umishayrin minat tehoros mazon shtei sudas, and you leave over, however, from the pure truma enough to eat for 2 meals, i.e. the night meal and the morning meal, but by the afternoon already it would be forbidden to eat chametz. K'dei lechol ad dalet sha'os, so that you'll be able to eat chametz, this truma tehora, assuming that you're a Kohen, on Shabbos until the 4th hour of the day on Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda, Ish Bartosa Shamim Shum Rabbi Yoshua. That is the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda Ish Bartosa, who said in the name of Rabbi Yoshua. So we see that Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda Ish Bartosa Shamim Shum Rabbi Yoshua's opinion is that like Rabbi Yehuda, that you eat chametz until through the 4th hour, but not in the 5th hour. Amrulo, they said to Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda Ish Bartosa Shamim Shum Rabbi Yoshua, Tehoros lo yisarfu. So they said to him that actually the truma tehora, the pure truma, you shouldn't burn. Shami yimatzu la'in ochlim, because what? Maybe you'll find other kohanim who can eat this truma tehora. In which case, there's no reason why you should burn it if potentially you could find somebody to eat it, because it's truma after all. You don't just want to burn it. So Amar lo'in k'fai bikshu v'lo matzu. So he said to them, yeah, but they, he knows all the people who live nearby. He knows all the people who live close by. He knows all the kohanim. He asked them if they want truma, and they said that they don't need. So he knows that nobody's coming. So Amar lo, they said to him, Shem mechutz l'chom alanu. Maybe they slept over outside of the walls of the city, so you didn't know that these kohanim were coming, but maybe they'll come into the city the next day, and then you can feed them the truma Torah. Don't burn it. Amar lo, he said to them, the divreichem af tluyos lo yisarfu. But then let me ask you something. Says Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda Ish Bartosa. He says, well then, maybe we also shouldn't burn the truma that we're not sure if it's pure or impure, because Shema Yavu Eliyahu v'Yatarim. Because maybe just like there might be kohanim sleeping outside the wall of the city who might come tomorrow and eat truma Torah, well maybe also Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come tomorrow on Shabbos, and he's going to tell us if the truma that we're not sure if it's pure or impure, he'll be able to tell us if it's pure or impure, and then we'll be able to eat that. So maybe we shouldn't burn that either. So now, of course, Neil is wondering, hey, what about the Gemara in Eruvin that said, Amrulo, they said to him, Kva muftach lo in Israel, that the Yidden already know Shein Eliyahu ba lo bar v'Shabbosos v'lo bar v'Yom Tovim pnei Torah, that Eliyahu Hanavi is not going to come on Erev Shabbos or on Erev Yom Tif, and this is Erev Yom Tif, right? Because we're talking about Erev Pesach, that's on Shabbos. So the first day of Pesach is Sunday. This is Shabbos is Erev Yom Tov, so we know that Eliyahu Hanavi is not going to come that day, and therefore you can burn the truma that you're not sure if it's pure or impure, because you can assume that Eliyahu Hanavi is not going to be coming on Shabbos to tell you. But maybe you should be concerned that there will be Kohanim who slept outside the city who might come in, and then you could feed them the truma. And then they said that they didn't move from there until they established that the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda ish bar Tosa sham mishum Rabbi Yeshua. So, my love, afilu le'echol. So mistama, when they said that the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda ish bar Tosa sham mishum Rabbi Yeshua, so that's even to eat, i.e., that you should not eat chametz past the 4th hour, and that's just like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And Rab was holding like that. So no, all they were saying was that they're holding like him regarding the burning of the chametz, that you would even burn truma to hora in advance and just leave enough food for 2 meals, but they don't necessarily hold like him regarding the 4 hours of the day. So you can't necessarily assume that Rab was holding like Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda ish bar Tosa in the name of Rabbi Yoshua. Okay. V'af Rebbe Savar Leha de Rav Nachman. Oh. So now the Gemara says that even Rebbe held like what Rav Nachman said, which is that that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you have to stop eating chametz at the end of the 4th hour. There's a story about a certain fellowship that he left saddlebags filled with chametz by Yochanan Chakoka v'nekvua achbarim, and the mice, they got into the sacks, into the saddlebags. Chametz mivatzbeitz v'yotze, and chametz was getting absolutely everywhere. Uvalifnei Rebbe, and Yochanan Chakoka came to Rebbe Sha'arishona in the 1st hour of the day. Amrlo hamtein. Rebbe said, no, don't sell it yet. Shnia amrlo hamtein. The 2nd hour, Rebbe still said, no, don't, Yochanan Chakuka, do not try to salvage it by selling the chametz. Shlishis Amar Lo Hamtein. In the 3rd hour, he also said, don't sell it. Revius Amar Lo Hamtein. In the 4th hour, he also said, don't sell it. Chamishis Amar Le Tzeir Mocha B'Shuk. Finally, in the 5th hour, Rebbe said to Yochanan Chakuka, okay, now, you can go and sell it in the market. My love, L'Nachrim, Mistama, what's going on is, came the 5th hour, the Yidden were no longer able to eat chametz, and so Rebbe was advising Yochanan Chakoka, now you can take this saddlebags full of chametz and you could sell it in the market to the non-Jewish people and send, salvage whatever you can and get money for it. So we see that Rebbe also holds like Rabbi Yehuda, that comes the 5th hour, the Yidden won't be eating chametz anymore. So my love, Lenachem Rav Yehuda, Rav Yosef lo the Yisrael Rav Meir. So Rav Yosef says no, it's to Yidden like Rav Meir, meaning Rav Yosef is saying no. Actually, Rebbe holds like Rav Meir, that in the 5th hour the Yidden are still allowed to eat chametz. And what Rebbe was saying was, hey, in the 5th hour you better chap a rein and sell it to the Yidden in the shuk while you still can. Now it still begs the question: then why did he keep on telling him to wait until the 5th hour? I mean, you could have been selling it up until now, but we're going to see actually, we're going to see what happens with this opinion of Rav Yosef at the end in a few more lines. So now Abaye says to Rav Yosef, if Rebbe is suggesting that Yochanan Chakoka should just sell it to Yidden, so why should he have to sell it to anybody? Why can't he just sell it to himself? Why can't he keep it and just give this fellow who deposited this saddlebags by him, why doesn't Yochanan Chakoka himself just give him some money for it? Why does he have to go out to the shuk and schlep out and sell it? So mishum chashada, because we don't chas v'shalom want this person who owns the saddlebags to suspect Yochanan Chakoka of having, been a little bit not straight with this whole situation. The Tanya, as we learn in a brayso, gaba eight staka, if you have a person who's in charge of the charity, she'ein lo emanim l'chalik, if, thank God things are good and there's no poor people to distribute the money to. Okay, so you have a guy who's in charge of a charity and they have all this money that's earmarked to give to people who need it, but thank God nobody needs it. Now the thing is that these coins are going to start getting rusty. Like, you got to keep the currency moving. If you just have them sitting around, they're going to get rusty and get ruined. So after a certain point, you have to swap out the copper coins for silver coins. So, portin la'acherim ve'im portin la'atzman. So in this case, the person in charge of the charity should not swap the copper coins with his own silver coins, because it might raise some suspicions, like, maybe there's some like self-dealing going on over here. Gaboy tamchui she'en lohem aniyim l'chalik. Now the tamchui was like a food kitchen kind of thing. So if you have somebody in charge of a food kitchen, but there's nobody showing up for the food, so mochin la'acherim, so you could sell the food to other people, ve'en mochin la'atzman, but the person in charge should not sell it to himself, mishum shenemar v'isim nekim me'Hashem u'Yisrael, as the pasuk says, by Ruvain and by what was it? Ruvain, Menashe, and Chatzi Shevet Gad, was that what it was? That you should be clean, right? You should be clean from God and from Israel. That I think it was Ruvain, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, right? That you should be clean from God and Israel. Meaning you don't want to do things that might raise suspicions. And therefore, if you have the person in charge of the charity, so you shouldn't, even if his intentions are completely pure and he's really not doing anything wrong, but if he's going to be the one swapping the money, or if he's going to be selling himself the food, maybe they'll think that he's giving it to himself at a particular discount. So they say just sell it to other people so that there shouldn't be any kinds of suspicions. So, here too, according to how Rav Yosef was explaining Rebbe, that he was suggesting that Yochanan Chakoka sell these saddlebags to Yidden. So why didn't he just sell it to himself? Because it might raise suspicions. Better to sell it to somebody else and keep yourself out of the picture. Try to salvage whatever he can for the person whose saddlebags unfortunately got raided by mice. Now, Amr le Rav Ada bar Masna le Rav Yosef beferish Amart lon tzei mochin lenachrim. Rav Yehuda says, Rav Ada bar Masna to Rav Yosef, actually you had told us explicitly that what Rebbe suggested was that this fellow go sell them in the 5th hour, that Yochanan Chakoka sell these saddlebags, the grain and the chametz in the saddlebags, to non-Jews in the 5th hour. Rav Yehuda, like Rav Yehuda says that by the 5th hour the Yidden are unable to eat it, because of course Rav Yosef, when he got older, he got sick and he forgot a lot of his learning, and he forgot things that he would say earlier. So in this case, Rav Ada bar Masna was reminding Rav Yosef that actually he had agreed, that he had also said that Rebbe was holding like Rav Yehuda, not like Rav Meir. Of course, we see all the time Abaye reminding Rav Yosef of things that he had said. Here we're saying that it's Rav Ada bar Masna reminding Rav Yosef. Amar Rav Yosef, Kman Azla, Shmaita, Di Rebbe. So says Rav Yosef that this statement of Rebbe, that he said that, you have this asset that belongs to somebody else that is getting destroyed, that's getting lost. So Rebbe suggested that you should go and sell it in the market to try to salvage the value of it. So who does that go like? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, it's like his father, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Mafked Peiris Eitzel Chavero. If you have Ruvain, he goes and he deposits some fruits by his friend, his buddy Shimon. Afilu ein avudin lo yiga boin. Even if those fruits are sitting there and rotting, don't touch them. Don't try to sell them. Don't try to salvage them. Leave them. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel mochon bebezdin. You could sell them in Bezdin to try to salvage them. And interestingly, that would be considered Ashavas Aveda, returning a lost object. Meaning, usually we think of Ashavas Aveda as you're walking in the street, you find Epis, so why don't I try to find who it belongs to? Here, actually, what's happening is you have an asset that's being destroyed, right? You have these fruits that are rotting, and therefore trying to salvage them and get money for them so that you can, Shimon can give to Ruvain at least the money. That would be considered Ashavas Aveda, returning a lost object, or an object in this case that's getting destroyed. Amalei Abaye. So one second. So Rav Yosef wanted to say that Rebbe therefore is holding like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Rebbe who says that, right, Rebbe who suggested to Yochanan Chakoka that he go out and salvage these saddlebags. So he must be holding like his father, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that when Reuven gives Shimon some fruits, as a deposit. So if they start rotting, so then Shimon can sell them off in Bezdin. So Amalei Abai says, yeah, but that's not necessarily a good proof, because V'lav Itmar Allah, wasn't it taught about it? Amar Rabbi Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Shanu Ela Bichdei Chesronon, that when the Tanakama says that you'd be unable, right, that don't touch them, so that's talking about specifically if they're just rotting normally. Fruits rot. So if they're rotting normally, don't touch them. There's nothing, out of the ordinary going on over here. But if they are rotting at a particularly spectacular rate, well then Mochrin Bebezdin, even the Tanakama would agree that you can sell them in Bezdin. B'chol sheken hacha, and certainly over here the pside legamre, that they're going to be completely lost. We're talking about chametz on Erev Pesach. Right, this is all going to be completely lost. So then certainly even the Tanakama would say that you'd be able to sell them in the Bezdin. So it's not necessarily, so Abai is saying to Rav Yosef, it's not necessarily a good proof that to say that Rebbe holds like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Theoretically, the Chachamim could also be in line with Rebbe as well. Oh, so said the Mishnah V'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shtei Chales Chule. So Rabbi Yehuda had said that there were two breads that they had on the Har Habayis, and when they were both there, people knew that they can eat chametz. When they got rid of one, it means that, okay, it's the 5th hour, so then no eating chametz, but you don't have to burn it yet. And then they would remove both loaves of bread, and then they would know, okay, we better burn our chametz. Tana comment of Yehuda, there was a certain teacher who was teaching in front of Rav Yehuda, al gab ha'itzdaba, and he taught al gav ha'itzdaba, on top of the itzdaba. What's the itzdaba? So on the Har Habayis, they had all these benches so that people could sit on them and relax. So a certain teacher was teaching this Mishnah in front of Rav Yehuda, the first Rosh Yeshiva of Pumbedisa, a student of Rav and Shmuel, Rav Yehuda. So Amalei, so Rav Yehuda said to this teacher, B'chilatz niyanu tzarich. Oh, the Shinina, as Janine likes to point out, the sharp one, Rav Yehuda says, B'chilatz niyanu tzarich, does, why would he be putting it on top of these benches? Right? Does he need to hide them? Meaning the whole point is that people should see them. What is putting it on a bench to? So Tni al gaga, but rather teach on the roofs of the benches. Right? That the benches had a roof above them, so that if it rains you won't get wet. And so rather they would put the breads on top of the roof of these benches so that they would be visible. People would see them. Amar Rachba, Amar Reb Yehuda, Harabayis tav kafulaya. So says Rachba in the name of Rabbi Yehuda that the Har Habayis had a double rows of benches. It wasn't just surrounded by one row of benches, it was surrounded by 2 rows of benches. So there was more sitting area. Tani Nami Hachi, we also learn in a brayso like this, Har Habayis tav kaful hoya, that the Har Habayis had these double rows of benches. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says Rabbi Yehuda istivanis haisa. It was called istivanis, which is like these things that they would have in front of the shops, that the shopkeepers would show their wares on. Nikres, that's what it was called. Oh, Istivanis haisa Nikres, it was called Istivanis Stav Lifnim Mistav, but still what it means, essentially, it was 2 rows of benches. Okay, now we are going, basically for the rest of the daf, we are going to discuss, Rabbi Yehuda had said in the Mishnah that these 2 loaves of bread were davka psulos, they were davka invalid breads. So we're going to discuss what exactly made these breads invalid. So amai psulos, what was possible about it? So Amar Reb Chanina, says Reb Chanina mitoch shayu merubos nifsalos belina. Interesting. So of course the Korban Toda, right? Korban Toda, we saw it at the end of Masech the Brachis. There are certain times when you bring a Korban Toda. It's basically parallel with when you would say the bracha of Hagomel. Who could tell me what the 4 situations are? Let's see if I can tell me. It's people who travel in the desert, people who are very sick, people who come out of jail, and then I think it's people who also travel on the seas. Did I miss one? Well, there are only 4, but maybe I doubled one up. Is it possible the desert and the sea are the same one? I don't know. Maybe I forgot one. But anyways, so when you add something to say thanks for, so you bring a Korban Toda. Now with the Korban Toda, you bring 40 breads. 30 of those breads are matzah, so it's not chametz, but 10 of them are actual bread and they're chametz. Now, the thing is, around the Shalosh Regalim, around the 3 holidays, so Jerusalem would become packed, right? And anybody who needed to bring a korban toda would mistama, maybe not always, but, generally, it would be more convenient to just wait and hold off to bring your korban toda until you go to Yerushalayim for the regel. So basically, when the Shalosh Regalim rolled around, so there were lots of korban todas being offered, which means that there was lots of bread to be eaten. That 10 loaves of bread, right? That's a lot of bread to eat. So, and this was all happening like around the same time. So there was lots of bread and not all of it got eaten. So Reb Chanina was saying is that because lots of people were bringing korban todas, and each one of those has 10 breads with it. And imagine, I don't know, who knows how many thousands of these things were, there must have been thousands and thousands of loaves of bread. So nifsalus belina, so therefore they can't, inevitably there are going to be some of these breads that did not get eaten on time, and a korban toda and all of its breads needs to be eaten, liyom v'layla, for the day that it's offered and until the next morning. And comes the next day, they'll already be pasul. And therefore, on Erev Pesach, there was no shortage of uneaten breads that are pasul, and that's what they would use. Titania, as we learn in the Brayse, and Mevi'in Toda b'Chag HaMatzis. You don't bring a korban toda on Pesach mipnei chametz shaba, because of the fact that 10 of the loaves of bread are chametz. So you don't bring a korban toda on Pesach, and I believe that that's also why we do not say the paragraph of Mizmor Litoda in Pesukei de Zimra on Pesach, because we don't bring the korban toda on Pesach. Pshita, this is obvious. Why do you have to tell us this? Of course, if it's chametz, you can't offer it. So Amar Rav Ada bar Hava hacha b'Yudaled askinon. Here, no, what this Brayse is saying is that you don't bring the korban toda even on the 14th of Nisan, even on Erev Pesach. V'kasavar ein mevi'in kodshim leveis hapsul. Because you cannot bring kodshim leveis hapsul, right? We don't want you offering a korban toda on like Erev Pesach in the morning before chametz becomes usher, if we know for sure that there is no chance that you're going to be able to eat, the meat and the bread all before noon. It's just not going to happen. So therefore, we don't offer a korban toda even on Erev Pesach. V'chuli alma, but everyone agrees that b'shlosha asar ma'isilu. But there's nothing wrong with bringing a korban toda on the 13th. Umitoch she'en merubos nifsalos belina. But because so many people are bringing a korban toda on the 13th of Nisan, well, inevitably there's going to be bread that is not eaten on time and will become invalid. And that is the bread that they use to demonstrate to people on Har HaBayis when they need to stop eating chametz, when they need to burn the chametz. Mishum Rabbi Yanai Amru Kisheros Hayu. Interesting. So Rabbi Yanai has a different take on it, right? Whereas according to Rabbi Chanina, we're talking about pasul breads. Rabbi Yanai says actually they're not talking about pasul breads. They were talking about breads that were not usable, but they weren't necessarily pasul per se. So then what are we talking about? Ve'ela amaykar lu psulos. So why are we calling them psulos? Shelo nishchat alein azevach. It's talking about that the korban wasn't yet slaughtered on them. Meaning, so if you have these breads and you say, okay, here's my 40 breads, I'm going to use these for my korban toda. Now you haven't yet shechted your korban toda, but you designated these breads to be for your korban toda. So in that case, you can't do anything else with them because you have to wait until the korban is shechted. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these breads that basically are unusable because you didn't shech the korban yet. But the Gemara says, okay, v'nishchot. So shech the korban. What are you waiting for? She'avad hazevach. Oh, it got lost. V'naisi zevach acher v'nishchot. Okay, so bring a different one and slaughter that one. De amr zo toda v'zo lachma. Oh, so the Gemara says, well, it's a situation where he already had said that this animal is going to be my korban toda. These breads are going to be the breads that I'm going to offer with this korban, and then the animal got away. So now you're stuck with these breads that you can't do anything left with because you already designated them to be for korban toda, and they're not reusable because they were designated for that specific animal. And it's like Rabba, the Amar Rabba, Avad alechem, maybe lechem acher. That if you lose the bread, so just replace the bread, no big deal. Of the toda, but if you lose the korban toda, ein maybe toda acheres, you can't just swap in a different animal when you designated already that this is going to be my korban toda and this is going to be the animal and this is going to be my bread. My time ma'akam lechem glal toda, because what's the main thing over here? The main event over here is the animal, it's the korban, is the sacrifice, right? And the bread is coming on account of the korban, of the animal. Ve'in toda glal lechem, but it's not the other way around. It's not that the toda, it's not that the animal is coming on account of the bread. The main thing is the animal. Therefore, if the animal gets lost, then you basically, these breads are unusable. If the breads get lost, find other bread. But if the animal gets lost, you don't just find another animal. Meaning you can find another animal, but you'd have to bring separate breads. You can't reuse these breads that were designated for that particular animal. But the Gemara says, v'nifkarinu, v'nafkinu l'chulin. But still, why don't you just make this bread hefker? Well, why don't you, no, not v'nifkarinu, v'nifrakinu, v'nafkinu l'chulin. Why don't you just transfer the holiness, transfer the kedusha of this bread onto money, and then use that money to buy a new korban toda? Meaning, why are we just saying that? Why are you just putting our hands up in the air and saying, well, there's nothing that we can do? These breads are unusable forever. What do you mean? Transfer their value onto money, or their holiness onto money, and then just use that to buy other korban todas, and then you can eat the bread. So why are you just kind of like using them as like a prop to indicate when you can and cannot eat chametz? So, okay, we change course. Really, it's talking about a situation where actually they did shecht the korban toda. So you had these breads, you designated them to be for your korban toda. You shechted the korban toda. V'nishbach adam. But then what happened was that the blood spilled on the floor. Darn it. Uchman, who's it like? Rebbe. It's like Rebbe Dama Rebbe, Shnei Devarim HaMatir, Ma'ilin Zeh V'lo Zeh. That says, Rebbe, that the two things that are matir. What are the two things that are matir? The two things that are matir are the shchita and the zrikas adam. That when you shecht the korban, that is when the breads become kadosh. That's when they become hekdesh. And then when you throw the blood on the mizbeach, so that's when you can actually eat the korban. Now, if you do one without the other, i.e., if you shech the korban, but you don't actually get around to throwing the blood on the mizbeach, well then you have a situation where you're stuck forever, right? You have these breads that became hektish already when the animal was shechted, but never quite became edible. The Tanya is, we learn in the Brisa, kivsei atzeres, the korban shlomims that were brought with the shtei alechem. Who could tell me what the shtei alechem are? The shtei alechem are the two breads that are offered on Shavuot from the new wheat of that year, and that is what allows wheat to be offered in the Beis HaMikdash from the time that the shtei alechem is offered and onwards. So when it comes to the korbanot that are offered with the animals, the sheep that are offered with these two breads, in mikadshin es alechem ela b'shchita. So they're mekadesh the lechem when you shech them. So if you have these two breads, the shtei alechem, and you have your sheep, so when you shecht the sheep, when you slaughter the sheep, that is when the bread becomes kadosh, it becomes hektish. Ketzad, how is it? Shachton lishman. So if you do the shchita on these animals, you slaughter them lishman, right, with the proper kavana, v'zarek daman lishman, and you also threw their blood in the mizbeach lishman, you did everything properly, well then kidesh alechem. So then the bread is kadosh. Shachton shelo lishman v'zarek daman shelo lishman. If you slaughtered the animal without the proper intention, and you threw the blood in the mizbeach without the proper intention, lo kidesh alechem, well then the shtei alechem does not become kadosh. Shachtan lishman, if you slaughtered the animal with the proper intention, v'zarek daman shelo lishman, and then you threw the blood onto the mizbeach without the proper intention, well, lechem kadosh ve'eno kadosh, well, the bread becomes kadosh, and it never becomes edible. It just kind of stays there forever. So, divrei Rebbe, that is Rebbe's opinion. And therefore we want to say that these breads that we're talking about, that they would use as a prop to indicate if you can and cannot eat chametz anymore, so that's talking about bread that was to be for a korban toda, and then you shechted the korban toda, and then all the blood fell on the floor, so the bread just kind of stays kadosh, but you can't actually eat them, so just use them to indicate about if you can eat chametz or not. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Omer says, Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon L'olam Einu Kadosh Alechem Ad Sheyishchot Lishman V'Yizrok Daman Lishman. Says Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon that the bread only becomes kadosh when you slaughter the animal with the proper intention and you throw the blood on the mizbeach with the proper intention. But unless you do both of those activities with the proper intention, well then the bread does not become kadosh. Afilu Tamer Reb Elazar Reb Shimon. The Gemara says actually you can even say that these breads are like Reb Elazar Reb Shimon. Okay, what does that mean? That it's talking about, well, where you receive the blood in a cup and it's spilled out. Meaning, Reb Elazar Reb Shimon can also explain that these breads that they would use were talking about where you had these breads for the Korban Todah. The Korban Todah was slaughtered. The blood was received in a cup. And at that point, it spilled on the floor. And even though it wasn't thrown on the Mizbeach, it's still going to be Kadosh. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon lekavua. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon holds like his father, that as long as it's able to be thrown on the Mizbeach, it's as if it was thrown on the Mizbeach. And therefore, once you do the slaughtering, lishma, and you receive it in the proper vessel, lishma, and so at that point, even though you haven't thrown it on the Mizbeach, it's enough to make the korban, the breads to be kadosh. But then, because it fell on the floor, you can't actually eat it, and rather just use it for a prop to indicate if you can eat chametz or not. Tana Mishum Reb Elazar, they said in the name of Reb Elazar, Mishum Reb Elazar Amru Ksheros Hayu, that actually these breads were just completely kasher. Kozman Shmunachos, as long as they were lying there, Kol Ha'am Ochlin, you can eat bread. Nitla Achas Man, when they removed one of these breads, Tolin, Lo Ochlin V'lo Sarfin, so then they wouldn't eat chametz anymore, but they also didn't have to burn it yet. Nitzlu Shtein, when they got rid of both breads, Hischilu Kulan Sarfin, then everyone would burn their chametz. Tanya, we learn in a brisa, Abba Shaul Omer, says Abba Shaul, Shtei Parus Hayu Charshos Bar Mishcha, that it wasn't actually breads that were the indication of when you can and cannot eat chametz. Rather, there were two cows that were plowing on Har Hazesim. Kozman Shestein Chorshos, as long as both of them were plowing the field, Kol Ha'am Ochlin, everyone can eat their chametz. Nidla Achas Man, they would then remove one of the cows, Tolin, Lo Ochlin V'lo Sorfin, well then the people would stop eating chametz, but they didn't yet have to necessarily burn it. Nitlu Shtein, Ischilu Kol Ha'am Sorfin, once both cows were removed from Har Hazesim, everyone said, okay, we better burn our chametz at this point. That was Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Pesachim. So at the beginning, we were discussing the opinion of Rav Nachman in the name of Rav, who said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. We asked questions initially to say that maybe it's like Rav Meir or Rav Gamliel, but in the end, we did not succeed. And then we suggested that maybe it could have been Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda Ish Bar Toso says in the name of Rabbi Yoshua that you would save enough truma tahora to eat before the 4th hour, but we said that was also not conclusive. We then moved on to discussing the breads that Rabbi Yehuda described in the Mishnah that they would have on Har HaBayis to indicate when you have to stop eating chametz. Rabbi Chanina said that these were breads that were pasul because there was just so much korban todas happening in Jerusalem around the Shalosh Regalim that they would be inevitably left over for Erev Pesach, and they would use these pasul breads to indicate when to stop eating chametz. Rabbi Yanai says actually they weren't exactly pasul, they were actually breads that they slaughtered the korban toda and then the blood fell on the floor, so the bread kind of came kadosh but never got released from their kedusha to be able to actually eat them. And then we also saw the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who said that actually these breads were completely kosher, and Abba Shaul said that these weren't breads at all. Actually, they would use these cows that were plowing on Har Hazesim as an indication. Chevra, that was Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Pesachim. Come prepared tomorrow for Daf Yud Daled. We begin the week of Reb Chanina Skan HaKohanim. This is going to be some pretty serious Tuma and Tara. If you remember from the beginning of Masechta Shabbos, or really throughout Masechta Shabbos, so there's going to be a lot of very core Tuma and Tara concepts that we're going to be exploring over the next week here on Masechta Pesachim. Cheers.